Morning once again. As I said, a fairly brief sermon this morning. It can be a touchy subject for some folks. It used to be touchy for me. The train up a child in the way they should go problem throughout the world today. There's a story about a young man that sold Bibles one summer to make money for college. The Bibles he sold had a concordance in them, which is a feature that lets people look up passages to key words to demonstrate the feature of the concordances in the Bibles he was selling. He would offer to look up a passage. Just ask him what it was, he'd look it up. He said, I've heard this is an accurate, true story, not made up. He said the passage most often requested was Proverbs 22, verse 6. People say to him stuff like, I want to make sure I have a proper understanding of that verse, because it sure doesn't seem to be working out in real life. And here's what Proverbs 22, verse 6 says. The way it reads in the Bible, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Now here's the way people think it reads. Teach your child the true religion, and when he reaches adulthood, he'll never leave the church. A lot of people think that's what it means. They are wrong. It didn't say that. We have a problem, the world, with Proverbs 22, verse 6, because probably every one of us can name a person, painfully maybe even a biological family member or one of our own children maybe, who was taught the truth in childhood but later left God and the church and Christ's doctrine. Maybe the most striking example of that sad situation is the man who wrote these following words, Solomon. He was a son of David, if you'll remember. He was in his early years. He was a tender-hearted servant of God, the Scriptures say. But in his old age, he forsook God and served idols. 1 Kings chapter 4, chapter 4, verse 4. Chapter 11, verse 4, says, For it was so when Solomon was old that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. And there's sort of some double irony there. The wise man Solomon's son, Rehoboam, turned out to be a fool according to the Scriptures. Immeasurable numbers of parents have grieved and suffered heartbreak and felt grievous guilt because their children went astray. How many times you've heard of a cop's kids going bad or a preacher's kids going bad, and teacher's kids dropping out of school? People, the parents, they just sort of cry out, that's my fault my kid went astray. I have failed. Because Proverbs 22 and verse 6 says, if I'd have trained my child right, they'd have never left the faith. Well, there's two problems with that. First, if Proverbs 22 and verse 6 actually means what the prevailing worldly view says it means, you have the Bible contradicting itself and teaching the impossibility of falling from grace. That's false doctrine. We're warned that we can fall from grace, aren't we? Take heed lest ye fall from grace. Second, that view of Proverbs 22 and verse 6 fails to take into account that we are allowed to be free moral agents. Free moral agency was granted to every child. God grants us freedom to choose what and who we're going to believe, what and who we're going to follow, so forth and so on. And he jealously guards that freedom too. He does not force anyone, you or me, to be a member of his family. Parents can provide guidance, love, good examples, correction, but a child can reject it, and some do. And it's not always the parent's fault. The Bible's full of accounts of godly parents whose children turned out to be what's called rotters, R-O-T-T-E-R-S. A rotter is a cruel, stingy, unkind, unruly, disobedient person. That's what a rotter was referred to. Cain, Ham, Esau, they were rotters. The prodigal son was a rotter. And sadly, our own experiences mirror, in a sense, that reality. Whatever Proverbs 22 verse 6 means, it means this. Its meaning has to harmonize with the ironclad principle of free moral agency taught throughout the Scripture. Even if it's your son or daughter, I'm sorry, you can't control every second of their life. You cannot control every word that comes out of their mouth for the rest of their life, and you cannot control their behavior. You can influence them, and that's about it. Why is there such a wide discrepancy between what Proverbs 22 and verse 6 says and what we see in real life? Here's some ways three ways people have tried to explain it. One, if a child goes astray, it's the parents' fault because they didn't raise them right. Period. Secondly, Proverbs 22 verse 6 is just saying it's true generally or occasionally that the child won't stray. But that don't always work out. And the third way a lot of people explain it, Proverbs 22 verse 6, is just Solomon's personal opinion and observation. It's not an inspired statement. There goes your head exploding, right? Everything in that Bible is an inspired statement. None of those explanations are true or accurate. The truth is, people have been misreading Proverbs 22 verse 6, and it is not the parents' fault. It's the fault of Bible translators or translations. Bear with me. They've been mistranslating that passage for centuries, and for some reason they keep on doing it. And it gets worse in these modern versions and modern translations of the original Bible. To begin with, scholars are all unanimously agreed that the word should in the original language of Proverbs 22 and verse 6 is not the original Hebrew word or text. Instead of train up a child in the way he should go, the accurate way to state it was, in a literal translation, train up a child according to his way. That was the original. Train up a child according to his way. And just what is that way? Not the way of truth, as most people understand it, although that type of training is certainly good, important, and necessary, but rather a child's way of doing and perceiving things. In our modern way of describing it, we'd say, as we're wired. Some people are wired this way, some people are wired that other way. You've heard that phrase used before. Some people got it in some aspects and some don't. I'm pretty good with mechanical aptitude and probably a little above average in carpentry skills. You put me on a keyboard and a computer and I'm a complete moron. I don't have that aptitude. So you have to treat me differently, don't you? If you're going to hire me to work in your store, you're going to have to make sure you have me do something I'm capable of doing effectively. It won't take too long until you take that computer away from me and give me a wrench or a saw. And I'll fix what's broke with a wrench or a saw. Other people have electrical, medical, nuclear physicist type aptitudes, but couldn't tell you the difference between a pair of pliers and a screwdriver. You've met them. If you got 2 or more kids, you have identified different personalities, didn't you? And you think back, you many times had to treat this child differently than this child because they both perceive things differently and define things differently. Didn't they? The assumption is that all this means in the way of righteousness and true religion is what Proverbs 22:6 is talking about. It did not say that, though. And that ought to be taught. But it's not what Solomon said or meant here. The Hebrew phrase for which the words "in the way he should go" meant according to the tenor of his ways. T-E-N-O-R. The course or harmony or aptitude is what tenor means. Try to train him in what he's trained in an area where he's trainable or she's trainable. It's not rocket scientist. The Hebrew phrase "in the way he should go" simply meant according to the way he's wired or the tenor of his ways. You can look it up in the original languages. It says that. It basically means train them up in harmony with their disposition, his natural talents, her individual character. Some people are going to understand something and perceive it accurately, immediately. Others, you might have to repeat that story for weeks or months before the lights come on. The word "taught" there is the obligation of parents to study the nature and disposition of their children and train them accordingly. That's the word that's being taught there. Instead of giving all the emphasis to those rigorous standards to be applied indiscriminately, each child's temperament is to be closely considered by the parents and teachers. And it's all to be done with one goal in mind: to achieve the greatest possible results of helping someone perceive something accurately and properly and learn how to do it. And there's some things some people can't learn how to do. We mentioned that a while ago. Here's still another explanation. The term "way" in our reading refers to a characteristic manner. Train up a child in the way he should go, or in the tenor of his way, is referring, that word "way," their characteristic manners. No 2 kids are alike. Every mom and dad knows that. You got to treat them a little bit different, don't you? We are to train our children according to their characteristic manner. Some are going to be artistic, some are going to be athletic, some are going to be academic. One may be strong-willed, the other one's completely compliant. One child can be encouraged by rewards and recognition. The other one couldn't care less. Study your children. Have your children. Teach them to study their children by developing an intimate relationship with them, each one of them. be able to help each child discover his or her road or wiring or aptitudes. You know, the military services have been giving what they call the ASVAB test for back in the 50s, I think, or 60s. Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery Test. 350 questions. It helps them identify what you're trainable for. If I'd have went in to see that Navy recruiter and said, I want to be in the nuclear program, well, take the ASVAB, we'll see. I wouldn't have qualified to enlist in the Navy. The way that test works, and this is sort of comparable to the Bible, you might say questions number, it's 300 question test, question number 141 through 149. Ask the question, you got 4 possible answers, A, B, C, or D. They're all 4 correct answers. But the correct answers you put down in those 9 questions, when you get to question number 150, it only has 1 correct answer, or it may have 4. But they use the logic you use to arrive at your particular correct answer to determine how you think, your character, your aptitudes. I scored real high in mechanical stuff and apparently explosives because they let me handle bombs, rockets, mines, torpedoes, and missiles for the next 22 years. But I did lousy on electronic kind of stuff and in the nuclear power program. The Bible gives us a test similar to that, doesn't it? There's sometimes, and we've mentioned it before, being wrong or being different can be wrong. But being different doesn't always make you wrong. There are more than 2 ways to do certain things. And if there's only one way God will allow it to be done, He'll tell you that way, won't He? We just need to train up our children to be able to make the most of their natural tendencies and abilities. I'm not saying don't try to teach the gospel to them. Most certainly, definitely do that. But Proverbs 22:6 is not limited to bringing them to church and teaching them Bible classes only. And when they get old, they're not going to depart from the church. The Bible does not say, it doesn't even imply that there. Children come in many different flavors, you could say. Personalities, temperaments, natures, their character, their makeup. Some are biased about some things and not biased about others. Their natural inclinations. Some of them have a more natural capacity for learning than others do. They think differently. Some kids are no-nonsense, action-oriented, assertive. Their brother or sister might be passive, delicate, tender, touchy. If you're a wise parent, you'll study your child's individual temperament and adapt your training to that temperament or that character in harmony with that child's character. If you got 2 kids and you're trying to teach one something that the other one doesn't grasp, you're going to have to figure out a different way to teach it to the other one. And don't try to teach them both at the same time. You're just going to confuse them. And let them know that you can be different without being wrong. But they also impress upon them, if it comes to God's doctrine, being different can get you in a world of trouble. When your child is older, he will not depart from that way, it says. If you're a wise parent, you'll study your child's character and act accordingly. When your child is older, he won't change his temperament or his character in that worldly way. The way of making decisions and dealing with life. They'll remember that. We often describe old people as being set in their ways, don't we? But those ways were ingrained in us mostly by Grandma, Grandpa, and Mom and Dad. So when Solomon said, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he was old he will not depart from it, he did not mean that it is impossible for a child brought up in God's way to leave the truth or the church. It happens all the time. Rather, it simply means that as a parent, you need to tailor your training approach and your teaching skills to each child's personality, each child's discipline, their learning style, their aptitudes, their way of making decisions. They won't depart from that later. That'll stick with them. One final quote, which hopefully some people who have experienced these problems might get some ease or comfort out of it. If your conscience is clear before the Lord, you'll be a better teacher to your children. And you should feel encouraged to take heart and not blame yourself for any of the mistakes your children made, unless they learn those mistakes from you, which is a hard one to admit sometimes, isn't it? Yeah, my boy learned that from me. But remember, you can't make their decisions for them for their whole life. You cannot control all of their relationships, especially their relationship with God. Their peer group is going to pull harder to tug them out of church than you can pull to keep them in church. I promise you that. Peer group's more fun. So if your kids rebel against the parents and reject the parents' religious faith in spite of their best efforts, sometimes you just have to let that bird fly away, hoping it'll come back to nest at the appropriate time. But we need to always be able to take comfort that we've been faithful to our responsibilities and obligations to the children as a parent. Think about Eunice and Lois, how their boy turned out. What many will call the finest, most effective gospel preacher in the New Testament. Bear in mind also that the final chapter of the children's story has not yet been written. Don't give up on the book. Trust the author. And don't become weak in that trust or that faith. If you've got a child, a grandchild, or know someone that's struggling with the behavior or activities of a child, just continue to set the best example you possibly can. And like we've mentioned in many other classes on many other subjects, belt on the butt works sometimes, but all this finger pointing and accusing, that never helps, does it? Gently help someone see the error of their ways without accusing them and shoving their errors down their own throats. Honey, not vinegar. If anybody here today has anything they'd like to share with the congregation, wants to pray for you, with you, or anything at all, or if you know someone in need that we could help, feel free to make your need known while we stand and sing.